Hello, I wanted to talk about my favorite champion, the Awoken Explosive Sentient. And this video will be a number of things. It'll be a guide, kind of a general principles guide to the Explosive Sentient, and just Covenant 25 runs in general. I wanted to, talk about some theories I had about different strategies at higher difficulties. And I just wanted to review some of these runs that I did using those principles. So, one thing that I've been watching a lot of, streamers and various content creators for Monster Train, and one thing I've noticed in a lot of the runs that have failed is it often seems to be the result of overdrafting cards. And this is just a theory of mine, but I wanted to test that theory. So the runs that you see here, I decided to put a restriction. They're all Covenant 25, and they're all the first, I reset until the first thing that met the criteria of the run that I could, so that I didn't try to find a perfect seed or something, but basically just the first runs I could find that were the Explosive Sentient. So sometimes you're not offered that, so that would be the only resets. And the additional restriction I put on myself to test the overdrafting cards is a thing that happens theory, is I would only use the cards I start with. So you start with a couple, common cards, uncommon cards. And you start with your starting cards, like your restores and whatever your secondary clan has, and you start, and then since it is Covenant 25, I gave one exception, which is before going to the Ring 2 fight, I would be allowed to draft one card, and I chose to draft a unit. So either from the unit trial in the first fight or from a banner in the post first fight area. So other than that, I would only use the cards I already had, or I could duplicate cards that I already had. And for the most part, I use that to duplicate restores. And I thought maybe that I could squeak out a victory or something with one of the attempts, but what I found was overwhelmingly it was extremely effective. So that's why I kind of wanted to show these runs here and maybe address some what I feel like are maybe some misconceptions about various things in Monster Train. And one of them is that if you're against Seraph the Chaste, who removes all of your buffs and debuffs, then regen is not an effective way to scale. And I think that that's not the case. You have 5 restores to start the game, and there are certainly more effective cards than restore for stacking regen. But if you sit up on the top floor or even the second floor, you have a lot of time to get regen if that's your method of scaling for living through relentless combat. Another theory I've heard is that against Seraph the Temperate, who provides sap debuffs to you, it's best to set up on multiple floors so that you can spread out the sap. And so obviously with only one unit, I wasn't able to do that here, but I didn't feel like that was a deterrent to the run at all. So those are some of the thoughts I had. The basic strategy is one thing to keep in mind. The Explosive Sentient himself deals with a lot of the issues that the Awoken clan as a whole has. And in order to be any Covenant 25 run, you need to deal with several issues. One of which is you need a way to kill the boss, and usually that means a way to do massive amounts of damage, front-loaded damage, so you don't need to last very long versus the boss, or you need a way to have enough defensive scaling that however much damage you do, you last long enough to do the damage. And with 5 starting restores, that is plenty. So without any sort of artifacts, Seraph attacks for 30 damage a round. So if you have 30 regen, you take 0 damage. If you have 29 regen, you take 1 damage. So at like 10 regen, it's not doing much, but the closer you get to 30, the more and more effective it is, and the more and more rounds you last. And so just without drafting any cards, you have plenty of defensive scaling versus the bosses. So that's covered just already by just the mere if you don't overdraft, you can scale versus the boss. Another issue you need to be able to deal with is dealing with the backlines. So depending on there's often really high damage attackers that will do too much damage if they get through to the pyre, or sometimes even just to any sort of units you have on the board. So Awoken in general has very good ways of dealing with backlines. One of them is, some of them are reactive, like you have sweepers, and they can kill. If they're not quick, they kill after the backliner's attack, so it doesn't deal with the hurting your units issue, but it deals with protecting your pyre. The same thing with sharpened spikes. Generally, you need maybe 5 spikes or 5 to 10 spikes, and that deals with all those high damage backline units. So Awoken has a number of ways of getting spikes and a number of sweep style things, and Glimmer and Vine Lash are all ways to deal with high damage, low health attackers in the back. The other thing that you need to deal with is heavies. So as you start getting later in the game, like ring 7 and 8, you'll start dealing with high health units that are in front of those weak, lower health units that they just have a ton of health. So if you can't get through them, then you can't, and you don't have a way to target those back units, then they're going to get through and they're going to kill your pyre at Covenant 25. So that is why I like the Explosive Sentient, because the very resource that you're using to stay alive versus relentless boss combat is the resource that you can use to kill those heavies. So just with only the 5 restores, now you have other cards in your deck including deadweights, but just for argument's sake, let's say you play 3 restores a turn. That is 180 damage, just about enough to kill a frontline unit. Then you'll have a regen stack pretty much every turn, so that's another 60 damage. So that's 240 damage that you're doing just from playing 3 1-cost spells that you start the game with. And ideally, you're going to be upgrading them so that you can play more than 3 a turn, or maybe you're playing more impactful spells. But just by staying alive, you are dealing the bulk of the problems you're presented with. Now, if you look at the runs here, there's kind of one thing a lot of the units that I have sitting behind my Sentient have in common, and that is they scale without requiring me to give them extra attention. So the Sirens on in the Stygian runs, they scale with every restore that I cast, and I cast a lot of restores. The Alpha Fiend just scales every round of combat. I don't need to give it any sort of buffs or anything. I mean, of course, Rage or something would obviously make it even stronger. And then the harvest the Baron is just scaling because we're killing everything in the same lane. So there are some other really strong Awoken units that benefit from some of the powerful enhancements that are available. So like probably one of the most common like off the rails potential unit is the Animus of Will, who has 3 times multi-strike base, but they only have 3 base attacks, so they need a lot of help to take advantage of that multi-strike. And for that reason, against Seraph the Temperate, if I'm playing with Awoken, I will avoid pretty much all Awoken banners. The Awoken have a couple strengths when it comes to their units. One is the Animus of Will, who has multi-strike, and with multi-strike, every enhancement you give it, it's just really that much more powerful. But Seraph the Temperate, the sap is that much more powerful against multi-striking units. For similar reasons, the other units that are provided by the banner are sweepers. You have the Shattered Shell and Husk Hermit, who are both sweepers, so they would deal with the backline normally, but their attack becomes 0 after like a couple rounds of combat unless you're actively doing things to make sure that their attack is scaling. So if you're actively doing things to make sure their attack is scaling, then you're not actively doing as much to heal yourself, probably. And you're not doing that 60 damage, and you're not necessarily staying alive as long during boss combat. So, yeah, I like to get a kind of passively scaling unit to sit behind the Sentient who's just going to stay alive. But since this restriction that I put on that I can't draft any cards, decision after that point is super simple. Train stewards become irrelevant pretty much nearly right away. Even the first fight, the 5 damage they do per round has nothing on the 20 damage you do with a single restore, or 40 damage really against the boss combat due to the regen stacks. And so removing them is a priority. Torches, secondary clan often has, can't think of a single starting spell that is nearly as good as a restore. So torches have a place. They can kill backliners. They need to be enhanced after like ring 3 or so in order to have a chance of doing that. Dregs need reform in order to really have any value. They can save some health sometimes, but I mean they remove themselves after, so that's actually a benefit. And frozen lances, even in ring 1, don't do nearly as much as restore, and morsels are great for supporting Gorger. And I will say that probably if you're playing with Umbra, it's not the best strategy to do what I've done here, which is to just completely ignore the secondary clan except for maybe a unit. The Umbra does well with a little bit more resources to support their stuff. So if once you've cut some cards, you can start playing 5 or 6 restores a turn, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with the waves pretty much single-handedly, and then whatever scaling unit you have will do the rest. So what I wonder is, I see a lot of skilled players prefer the Bristling Champion. And the Bristling Champion has 40 base spikes damage, which is kind of a weird feature. So 40 base damage does about 4 times what you need to kill everything but the heavies, like extremely excessive damage. 40 damage does maybe a quarter of the heavy's health each time they attack. Or if there's a multi-strike trial, it gets better. So they'll maybe do half their health, which is pretty significant if you happen to be doing those trials. Then they have synergies like Bramble Lash. So with Bramble Lash, you can kill a unit basically at the cost of a 2-cost spell that does not help keep you alive other than killing the unit. Generally, unless you have multiple Bramble Lashes, it's difficult to put yourself in a situation where you can use it on the actual boss. So you can use it to clear waves before the boss. Now, one thing that Spikes does have an advantage is dealing with these multi-strike, like Seraph, for example. The Spike Sentient by base does more damage per round than the Sentient. Sentient does 60 damage a round. The Bristling Champion does 120 damage a round, so it does double because of the multi-strike. And there's, of course, also the artifact that doubles spike damage. So at that point, raw damage versus boss, Bristling Champion is outclasses the exploding. But I would say that that's not the problem that this clan has in general, and that's why I prefer the Explosive Sentient. This is, I'm coming the end of my runs here. They all ended around the same time. 18-minute Covenant 25 run. Extremely, let me just say, what's the word I'm looking for? Unoptimal play. Like, obviously, it's not the optimal decision to completely ignore any sort of card drafts that you get, but it's just surprisingly effective. I did this like a few times. I chose 4 just to show a variety of content, but I did more than 4, and it just worked every time. So I think more people should explore the Explosive that maybe prefer the Bristling now. It's a very effective champ, and the strategy just boils down to you can play your starting cards and it kills things. Cost reduce them, give it double stacks so that you're scaling versus a boss, and then you can beat the game at the hardest difficulty with your starting cards. Anyways, what are your thoughts? Leave them in the comments. Like the video if you liked it. I'm curious to see, maybe I'm missing something about this and see the appeal of some other paths. I didn't really talk. What inspired me for this video is overdrafting cards. I didn't really talk about that much, but let's say I drafted more cards. Then I would have more turns where I don't play Restore. Maybe I play a Razor Sharp Edge. Maybe my backliner does a little bit more damage, but then it does 10 more damage, but I do 60 less damage that round. So I would say that nearly, 75% of the runs that I see fail on Twitch, I would say is because of overdrafting of cards. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox for now. Like I said, please leave a comment if you have theories or disagree with me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.